Herb, 1939, Dallas, Texas. Let's go back. Tell me about life when you were just a little boy.
Well, what I remember is our house where we were living in the inner city at San Jacinto and Hall Street. My grandparents had rented the house, and my mother and dad were living with my grandparents. Everybody was very poor. My grandmother raised chickens in the backyard, and the house was across the street from the old St. Paul Hospital in Bryan Place. Susie had already been born 4 years ahead of me, and I came across the street from the hospital to our house, and I had early memories of my grandmother in the backyard with the chickens, and me at about 3 or 4 on the sidewalk riding a bicycle and playing with my next door neighbors because it was an African American neighborhood. When I was born, my grandfather had a store a block away at the corner of Ross and Hall, and my dad, I believe, worked with my grandfather and in the store, and then my dad opened a store down the street from my grandfather on that same block, and it was a dry goods store, just popular price clothing, work clothes for men, women.
What was the name of it?
It was called the Family Store. Was the one that my dad ended up with. I don't remember what the name of my grandfather's store was because he died when I was 3 years old and the store was closed up, and my dad moved his store closer to the corner, and I believe might have taken my grandfather's location.
Now, is that what your dad went on to stay in that business?
My dad stayed in that business for 44 years, and my mother and my dad worked together in the store. He'd be at work at 8 o'clock, open up and close up every day, like a clock at 6:30. And what's amazing in today's world, they had the store open every Saturday night, and I mean every Saturday night, all our lives, till 9 o'clock at night. And the reason for that was because the Big Fishman Laundry was across the street, and so they didn't do business on Saturday. They didn't do business, and so that's when everybody got paid at the laundry, and they came over, and they sent money orders, and they bought clothes, and they did certain things. So that was what my parents did all their life. They were very family oriented. We ate dinner every night together when they got home from work, and on Sundays we went to Sunday school, and then we spent the Sunday with our cousins.
Now tell me about your grandparents a little bit more. Your grandfather had that store, and you don't remember the name of it. What type of store was it?
It was a general, clothing store, very popular price.
When they each had the two stores going, were they competing against each other?
My grandfather passed away when I was 3 years old, so I can't. I assume they were if they were on the same block, but that's okay because in retail you have 8 shoe stores and 6 jewelry stores, and the more clothing stores you have, the better cross traffic you have.
Right.
So I'm sure they both were competing when they had the stores together. I don't know how long before my grandfather passed away that my dad opened the store.
Tell me about your grandparents on the other side.
Okay, the Rosen side. Both of my grandfathers died when I was 3 years old. I was born in 1939, they died in 1942. So Morris Rosen was my mother's father, and Max Weitzman was my dad's father. And it was such a coincidence that both of them died in 1942. And so I don't remember my grandfathers, just vaguely, nothing specific. But both grandmothers lived longer. My mother's mother, Katie Rosen, wonderful lady, and she was just the sweetest thing. And I had grown up, with her in the house there at San Jacinto and Hall Street, and moved from there when I was 5. And we moved. Dad bought a duplex out in East Dallas on Goodwin Street between Greenville and Skillman, and so we moved out there. And I went to Robert E. Lee School, starting in the 1st grade. But my grandma Rosen had diabetes. She became sick. She had to have her leg amputated, and she was in a nursing home on Gaston and I think maybe Peak. And my mother would go every day to see her because it wasn't too far from the store. And I would go with my mother all the time to see my grandmother until she passed away. And she just was a wonderful lady.
Now, your grandfather on your mom's side, do you know what he did for a living?
My grandfather on my mom's side, he had the dry goods store. My grandfather on my dad's side, he came to this country, immigrated, I think from Poland, and he was a baker. And so he had some family here when he came over. I think he went to Kansas City. He ends up down in Texas, I think doing baking. He goes to Wichita Falls when they had the oil boom and built a bakery. And then I'm in the shopping center business, so people go in and sometimes they don't make it. My grandfather didn't make it because the oil boom subsided and he went broke. And he goes up to Barger, Texas, in the Panhandle. Don't know why he went up to Barger. And my grandmother, Devorah, went with him, and Max bought some real estate, and operated a hotel up there. And I think maybe why they went there was because my dad had two sisters. Ida was the younger one, and Rose was the older one. And Rose had married Harry Argovitz. And I think they had gone up to Barger early and had set up a small hardware store. My uncle Harry Argovitz was very adept at hardware and great retailer. And so I think they might have been up there and already settled down. So that's when he left Wichita Falls and he came to Barger, Texas.
Were all your grandparents coming from Europe?
Yes.
And do you know any of the stories about what it took for them to get here?
My dad had brothers, and they split up in Europe, and later in life we connected with some of the cousins, second cousins and third cousins. So the history on my dad's side was just not spoken about a lot. And my dad didn't remember. In November of this past year, 14, we went over to visit some of the Weitzman cousins that had moved here from South Africa. And also one of the cousins were from London, England. And so we talked about the history of our family in Europe. Yeah, Monty Green, my cousin from London, said, well, I'll put it down on paper and let you see who the cousins are. Well, he gave us pictures of our great-great-grandfather, which was my grandfather's mother and dad. And they were from Poland. And then
Their names?
Their name were David Hirsch Weitzman and Malka, his wife. And my grandparents were Max and Devorah, which were their children. My grandfather, Max Weitzman, had several other sisters, and there were Bavka, Esther, Tari, and Pinchas. And they were all, as far as I know, living in Europe. There were Weitzman cousins. One of them went over and went to Johannesburg, South Africa. And we met those cousins later. My dad ended up making contact through connections in the family with these relatives in Europe. And then we found this relative in South Africa. And the ones in South Africa moved to Boca Raton. They've got 4 generations of Weitzmans over there now. They've got my dad's cousin and his daughter, who's married to Clive Scher, Loretta, and their children, which are a boy and two daughters, and then their grandchildren. And so it's amazing that we have found some of our family, and we also have some family in London that we know of. On the Rosen side, Grandma Rosen and Grandpa was Morris and Katie Rosen. Grandpa's Hebrew name was Moshe, or Moses, which he went Mr. Rosen, and he was born in 1870 in Warsaw, Poland, and we found ancestry back to the back to the 1600s on the Rosen side. At 18 years old, he married Katie, my grandmother. She was 15 years old. In 1888, it was a matchup, and Morris's father was Meyer Rosen. He was born in Warsaw, Poland, and Morris's mother was Anna Rosen. She was born in Warsaw, Poland. Katie's father, my grandmother, his name was Arya Tombach. So my grandmother her maiden name was Tombach, and Katie's mother was Minka Tombach, and she was born April 15th, 1873. Grandma, Katie Rosen was an orphan, and her family died of influenza. Her aunt and uncle raised her. She met Grandma on the day that they were married in 1888. And 9 months later, she had a baby.
Now, did they ever talk to the family at all what it was like to meet the day they got married? It was an arranged marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Did they ever talk about that at all?
Never talked to me about it. I didn't. My mother, it was like there wasn't. Either they won't talk about it, or they didn't have a good recollection. Today, with ancestries.com and everything, you can get a lot about historical information. And my parents only had a high school education. They were so street smart, but technologically the technology wasn't there to go do this, and so they were so busy with raising their families here and working and making a living, they didn't go search for relatives, back in Europe.
Right. Did your folks ever tell you about how the Depression affected them?
The Depression and being poor early on in life had a great effect on my parents. They were hugely frugal. To the time that they died, they were savers. If they made $1, they saved 15, 20 cents. And that was what they were making was very little.
Right.
But they saved, and it had a big effect on them. They talked about the Depression. My dad was, as I say, born in 1908. So, when the Depression came, he was 15, 16, 17 years old, and maybe a little older. My mother, was same age my dad, approximately, and so both of them were affected by it.
You know how your folks met?
My dad had grown up in Barger, and he had a few little businesses in Barger, and he ended up going into, as a young man, he went in and partnered with someone in a clothing store in Vernon, Texas, and nothing was in Vernon, so he would come into Dallas because that's where the Jewish population was. So they would go to several restaurants there, where everybody met, and my grandmother, at San Jacinto and Hall Street, she had not boarders but people that came over and would be people from out of town, and she would have them for dinner, and I think they would probably pay her a little bit, but their house was always open to strangers and visitors to the city, and so she had at the restaurant, my dad was, I think the story was, he said, well, are there some nice Jewish girls here to meet? Where are they? He said, well, the Rosen clan over there, they got 5 daughters, 4 daughters, but there was a 5th one that was really a first cousin, but she was like a sister. She was the same age as my mother, exactly. So she was like a sister to my mother all her life. So I think he went over there to have dinner and met my mother, and they got married.
Where did you go to grammar school?
I went to, for the first, through the 5th grade, to Robert E. Lee in East Dallas on Goodwin, right there between Greenville and Skillman. And then when I was 11 years old, Dad and Mom bought one of our cousins' houses that they were going to move, and we bought Ben Aaron's house, and then Leonard Levy and B. Levy were Ben Aaron's. Lee was Ben's sister, so they were living together. Ben never had been married, and so this was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house on Amherst, right there between Tulane and Preston, 1 block north of Lovers Lane. And I thought that was the biggest house ever, because I had my own room at that time, and I was 11, and so I started the 6th grade at Higher Elementary School in University Park, and then went to Highland Park Junior High School and Highland Park High School.
Now, you had mentioned Susie. You had another sister, though, also?
Maxine. And Maxine is 4 years younger than me.
Yeah. And so you were the oldest, or Susie was the oldest?
Susie's the oldest, and I'm in the middle.
What did you do for fun in high school?
Well, in high school, I played all sports. When I was, living, in Goodwin, in East Dallas, from, about 6 years old to 11 years old, we had a lot next to us. So every day we were playing soccer out there, or street hockey, or we were playing, baseball or football. So I played every day because my parents were working every day. And I was always, it's not like today. I mean, we created our own fun. And I was always playing sports. That took a big part of my life, just from the fun standpoint.
World War II broke out. Did that affect your family at all?
Not that I can remember. Few little things I remember was Dad had piddled around in real estate. That's where I got exposed to it. When I was 4 or 5 years old, he had bought a few rent houses behind his store, and I would go with him. He would collect the rent on a weekly basis, and I asked questions. I said, "Why are you doing this? Why are you, trying to understand why Dad, what he was doing?"
Right.
And then, I started getting the concepts of it. Very simple. Right. You make an investment just like anything. There's no guarantees. There's risk. Over time, you pay it off, and you have extra income. Right. It's just an investment. So Dad had bought a lot on Ross Avenue, and he started building, and the war came, and Dad couldn't get material, so the building just kind of had to sit half finished till he finally finished it. And I can't think of any other thing that affected us
Right.
in the war, except I couldn't get my bubble gum as a kid, because they were, there was a shortage of sugar.
All right, let's move on. Did you go in the service, or was it on to college?
I went straight into the service after high school. Yeah, I was in the Reserve Forces Act of 1957, and it worked out perfect for me, because what I didn't want to do was go to college and then go for 2 years in the military. And I wanted to go straight to work, and I was able to enroll in this, playing with some other people from high school. By going in 1957, the plan was you go 6 months active duty, which I did. I spent time at Fort Bliss in El Paso and Fort Chaffee in Arkansas, Fort Smith, Arkansas. And then, I was a midterm graduate. So I graduated in January. So I was able to get my military behind me, going right into the military, and I got out in August. And I had my military behind me, and then ahead of me, I had 7.5 years of reserve meetings, which I made while I was at college and out of college. So what I saw was an opportunity for me to get this behind me and go straight into work. I got a deferment while I was in the military, in college. I was deferred under this plan. So I knew I was going to get my college education, which is what I wanted to do. And so I was able to get my college education. And the Vietnam War was going on while I was in college.
What college were you at?
I was at the University of Texas in Austin.
Now, you talk about at a very young age you were introduced to real estate and everything. So was that always your plan, was to go into real estate?
Everybody has a lot of things that they are exposed to, and they say, I want to do this, I want to do that. Well, I worked for Abe Goff, who had Goff's Hamburgers, on Lovers Lane, and it was a natural charcoal hamburger, and it was great sauces, and I loved it, and so I worked there during high school. I'd work on Saturdays. In the summer, I would have worked in the summer during my 3 years of high school. And I said, well, I'm going to copy what Mr. Goff had done. I'm going to open a chain of hamburger restaurants. Well, that, went out the window when I couldn't figure out how he made the number 1 and number 2 sauces, which were special. They were secret.
Yeah.
So then, the experience I had with Dad and understanding real estate always stayed with me, and I knew that was of interest, the investing side and so forth. But then Susie married Fred Ablon, and as a kid, they were 4 years older than me, and Freddie was a great athlete, and so he was one I always looked up to, fun guy, and they had a big business. It's called Ablon Poultry and Egg. I thought, boy, if I could just go to work for them, because I didn't know what I was going to do, and I'd have a job with Ablon. Well, Ablon, when I got out of college, Ablon wasn't what I wanted to do. I wouldn't even want to be in the poultry and egg business, and I decided to get into the real estate brokerage business, and I did that when I graduated in 1961. I had an interesting exposure to real estate my junior year. The summer, I was going to try to work for Henry Miller Company that summer, and I thought I had a job because I'd interviewed during the year, and he said, well, let me know, when you're coming back. He says, we have to wait and see if Charlie Jackson, who's an intern that we have now at our company, stays with us for the summer. If we have him stay, then we don't have a position. But if Charlie Jackson, who was the star halfback for SMU, if he stays, then we're not going to have a position. And so I didn't know till the day school was out in 1960 if I had a job for Miller that summer. So I come in, and Miller wasn't in town. He'd gone to, a convention. His father had gone to Europe. No one to talk to, and they'd left me no message. So I didn't know if I had a job. So I go, say, what am I going to do? And so I said, well, I'm going to go. I've been taking business courses at Texas, but I hadn't had any real estate courses. So I'm going to go this summer and start taking real estate courses. So I went up to SMU, signed up for morning classes over at 11 o'clock every day, and I was able to, get some of these courses, start my real estate studies there at SMU. But after I registered the next day, I'm driving back from SMU. I go through Snyder Plaza on my way home. Snyder Plaza is a little shopping area by SMU, the north end of SMU. And I look up, and there's Ralph A. Porter Real Estate. So I said, I go around, turn around, come back and park. I'm going to go see if they can use me for this summer, while I'm taking this SMU course for 6 weeks. So I ended up going in, and there was a woman by the name of Irma Langram. I still remember. She was 80 years old. She was a salesperson. And I said, I'd like to see Mr. Porter. And she said, wait just a second. So he goes back, and she comes back and said, well, he'll see you right now. I said, well, I'm not dressed. I'm in shorts and T-shirts and everything. So I go back, and I tell him that I thought I had a job with Henry Miller Company. And, of course, what was interesting is that the father, Ralph A. Porter, was a contemporary of Henry Miller Sr. Buddy Porter, who ran the company now, was a contemporary of Henry Miller Jr. And so he said, look, I'll hire you here while you're going to school. I'll give you $75 a month. I'll help you get your real estate license. And so to make a long story short, in that 6 weeks, I sold 2 properties. Yeah, and it was interesting how I sold a commercial building, and I sold a house, and in 4 weeks, I had 2 properties under contract ready to close. I was going to make $6,000 in 4 weeks, working about 3 or 4 hours a day, and I get a call, and it's Henry Miller Jr. on the phone, and he talked very slow, and he said, Herb, I'm really sorry, we weren't here when you got back from school, but I want you to know Charlie Jackson didn't work with us this summer. We got a job for you. I says, Mr. Miller, you won't believe what's happened. I said, I went and signed up for school, and I started to work at Buddy Porter's, and I've already got 2 properties under contract. I'm going to make $6,000, and you know what? In 2 weeks, they'll all be closed, and I'm going to New York with my buddies to spend it.
Good for you.
And he said, well, he was kind of shell-shocked. He said, I think when you get out of college next year, we'll have a place for you.
You sell that commercial
Yeah.
property, you're a kid,
Mm-hmm.
in a t-shirt and shorts, and did a light bulb go off in your head like, my gosh, look what I just did? I mean, who was it that said yes to you for that first time?
Well, it's amazing how it happened, because after I get into work at Buddy Porter's every day, when I get through with my class at 11 o'clock, I go in and I'd really quickly get through with the postings. What he hired me for, they collect a lot of rentals on duplexes, around Snyder Plaza. So the rent checks would come in, I'd post them, and then I'd start doing research on houses. Going through all the listings, there was only one commercial building. And there was a friend of this woman, Irma Langren, her husband passed away, had given Irma Langren the listing, and you're not going to believe what property it was. Where I lived on Goodwin, at the corner at Goodwin and Greenville, there was a little strip, and it had Greenville Avenue Drugs in it. And it had Greenville Avenue Supermarket, it had a little Greenville Avenue Garage, and it had another little establishment. And I would spend between 6 years old and when I moved, I was in that drugstore, kind of huddled in the corner, reading comic books at that particular property. And so I had a date a couple days later, the weekend, and her father was there because, I was young, and father wanted to see, who she was going out with. And it was with Sergeant Shillette and Sam Shillette. Had Mari Auto Sales on Ross Avenue, down the street from my dad's store. And so he said to me, Herb, he says, what are you doing this summer? I said, I'm working in real estate. He said, you have any commercial buildings? I said, yeah, I do. And so he said, which one? What do you have? I said, well, I got this building on Goodwin and Greenville. And I told him all about it. And he said, well, why don't you give me some information? And I did. He bought it.
Wow. And that changed everything for you.
Oh, yeah.
So then you go to work for Henry S. Miller.
Yes.
How long was it before you decided you want to be on your own?
Well, I thought I wanted to be on my own, the day I walked in their door. Yeah, I said, I'm going to get 3 years of training, I'm going to open my own company. But what happened? He was a special man. I was fortunate to have him, in my young age. He was, a generation ahead of me. So he mentored me. And so 2 or 3 years go by, I was getting all this opportunity, and I was getting mentored, and he became a partner with me. So, because I had a leaning toward ownership and development. And so I started buying properties, and Henry was my partner. I came to him and I said, look, there's properties out here that I think are good investments. I said, will you go in with me? And of course he had a better financial statement than I had. Mine was zero. And so he signed the notes with me. We got loans. And that's where I, developed this tremendous loyalty to the Miller Company. And he was my partner for about the next 14, 15 years.
Now tell me about the business that you grew.
My career has been in the golden age of Dallas, and particularly the golden age of real estate. And so I was able, Henry gave me the opportunity to grow, never said no to me, never had an argument with him. And so it breaks down in segments. The company played a big part, and I started off set up their land division, and did that for about 3 or 4 years. And then, I'd be in with investors, and they'd say, I don't want to have a passive investment. Give me something that produces income. And then I'd run into somebody, who has retail, and I'd say, help me with retail. And so I started diversifying after about 3 years. The land focus for 3 or 4 years was very, very, very important to me, and understanding values, because it runs from ranch land to near town to growth for subdivisions, then all the other uses that happen, office, apartments, retail, all these these things all are part of a timing issue and density. And so I grew the commercial and retail operation of the company, which operated about 55-60% of Henry Miller Company. I went ahead to other cities and opened up our offices in Houston, San Antonio, and Austin. And we gained a national reputation. We started off doing small things. We were at the cutting edge of the franchise business when it started. I was at the cutting edge of the C-store business with 7-Eleven. I brought in Kentucky Fried Chicken to the market, who was the father of franchising, John Y. Brown, who became the governor of Kentucky, and did 120 stores for them. And then, as being the leader in that area, anybody that came to town came to me. I did Norman Brinker's initial steak and nails. I brought Dunkin' Donut to the city, and Jack in the Box to the city, Crystal Hamburgers to the city, and so that was a great platform where it was dealing with small sites. So we did a lot of C-stores. And then we also did the retail in First City Center, downtown, which is where the M-Bank was located. And then when the Crescent was done, we leased the Crescent and bought in Stanley Korshak and all the stores for that project. When Ray Hunt did the West End, and as part of that, Union Station got taken in, incorporated into the redevelopment there at Reunion Arena, we converted the Union Station to retail. We put the Railhead restaurant there and so forth. Gerald Hines was the developer of the Galleria in Houston, and when he did that project, we were leasing a competing project next to it. It was called the Sack Center of Fashion. It was owned by the British Airways Pension Fund. And so we ended up with a lot of tenants that he wanted in our project. And so when he came to Dallas to do the Galleria, he hired us to lease it. And so we leased it, and we filled it up to about 93% until he took it over. And we brought the famous Gump's store out of San Francisco. They never had expanded out of San Francisco, and we brought them to Texas, and they took a store in Houston Galleria and Dallas Galleria. I was doing the brokerage business, but I was always developing.
Right.
And the development arm became bigger and bigger. And after 15 years, Henry Miller decided, he was getting older, didn't want to be a partner. He says, "Right, you just take it and run with it." And I built the HEW Property Group, floor up from Henry Miller Company. And all the time we were building Henry Miller, because I was on the board and I was the president of the commercial operations. We were able to grow our development operation, and we built probably 250 shopping centers up to the current time. One that I built recently is Shops at South Lake. Out at South Lake, a very wealthy area, 300,000 feet, and it's got Central Market, Nordstrom's in it. But I've got a lot of centers, that are 650,000 foot centers. Recently, I bought the Golden Triangle Mall, and it was failing. It's 765,000 feet, and totally remodeled it. And it's got Nordstrom, it's got Macy's, Penny's, Sears, and Dillard's in it. And then we do a lot of grocery stores, and so the development program is very big for us today. We're building 17 centers around the country, around the state. My model was to gain market share and have market share in each city of Texas, the bigger cities. So we're in Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, and we don't go to the middle markets because we focus.
Tell me about when you met Jeannie.
Met her in 1964, I guess, and I'd been down to Austin for a football weekend, and came back because I was president of Liveliers. Liveliers was the single social group that a bunch of us formed with the support of Sheriff Israel and Temple to kind of have a social group that matched up with the non-Jewish social groups like the Dervish Club or the Idlewild Club. And so for us to meet, and it grew to be about 450 singles. And I came back, and coincidentally, some of my friends had told me to meet her because she had moved here. She went to college at Austin, at UT, and she got there the year I left. She had gone to junior college 2 years before. So I missed her. So when she graduated 2 years later, she came to Dallas, and I called her a couple times, and I never could get a date with her. So that night I came back from the Texas football weekend. We had a book review with Rabbi Levi Olin over at the temple. And I was so tired after that weekend, I had to be there to introduce him. But I was walking out, and I saw her name on a name tag. And I went out and got a drink of water, came back in and introduced myself. And she sized her for coffee next night.
When did you guys get married?
Well, got married about 6 months, but we got engaged in 6 weeks.
You're married 44 years. She passed away from cancer.
Mm-hmm.
2 daughters.
Yep.
Then you married again to Donna. How did you meet Donna?
I met Donna. Didn't know her. Craig Hall is a outstanding developer and great friend of mine here in Dallas, and he lived at the Plaza, which is connected to the mansion.
Right.
And he, I walk on the Katy Trail or bike. So I came over on Sunday to meet him, and we were going to go walk, and I've actually biked over, and he was coming out, and so here comes this lady out the door, after him, and Donna knew him, not well, but she was president of a company called Realty Capital Partners, and she had been mayor 3 terms over in Colleyville, a very wealthy community on the west side of DFW Airport. And she had gotten divorced, and she had moved out of Colleyville and moved and taken an apartment over at the Plaza. And so she walked over to say hello to Craig, and then Craig introduced me to her because she lived in the building. And that's where I met her. And then it was...
When did you guys get married?
January 22nd, 2012.
In your lifetime, there's been so many advancements that come along that you went, wow, how do we ever get along without that?
I take technology for what technology is. When you grow up with paper, it's some of it, it's a security blanket. So, you find a way to mix it. So there's some things that technology helps us with, and some things that it doesn't. And so I like to do, I like to use technology on some things, but in our business, nothing takes the place of relationships. Nothing takes the place of talking face to face. And that's what I think, might be lost with technology today.
Right. No, that's a good point. In your lifetime, you've lived through so many momentous occasions. Obviously, when you're little, World War II, you lived through the Vietnam era, President Kennedy assassination, the moon landing in '69, something good for the first time, Martin Luther King assassination, tragedy of 9/11. Was there something on the national scene, Herb, that came along that you went, wow, I know exactly where I was the moment it happened?
Absolutely. The assassination of President Kennedy, like it was yesterday. And Henry Miller had been invited to the lunch, and we had talked about it. So I said, well, I'm going to get a glimpse of him. So I go with my car. They're speaking at the Apparel Mart, and I go and park, and I go right at the very corner. I'm standing at the very corner of Stemmons Freeway and Industrial, where you turn in, and you go up to the Apparel Mart, and what happened was all the sirens were going off, and there was a guy standing next to me, and they were coming down Stemmons Freeway. They made the turn in front of me on Industrial. Instead of turning into the Apparel Mart, they sped up, and there were maybe 20, 30 police motorcycles with lights blaring, and the car turned 10 feet in front of me, and I said, what's going on to this guy next door? Do you know? He says, well, the president's been shot.
Wow. You and Jeannie had the 2 daughters and 4 grandkids.
Yes.
What advice do you have for the next generation?
I think back through my life, and I really think that it's all about family.